Good day, everyone. I'm Vanna from the Catholic Network South Africa. Today, we will be looking at somebody very dear to us as Catholic converts, but also to all Catholics, St. John Henry Newman. St. John Henry Newman will be declared a doctor or teacher of the Church on 1 November 2025. And this declaration is a significant and historic moment, since this indicates that the church really treasures the specific individual's teachings with regards to the church's own magisterium in guiding us as Catholic Christians. So we are already assured of St. John Henry Newman's saintly life through his canonization in 2019, but he's being made a doctor of the church calls us again to take a look at the life of this extraordinary saint of the church, especially since he was born and baptized not as a Catholic, but as an Anglican. He went through many of the same sort of anxieties and questions, although with him being John Henry Newman, quite complex questions then that all of us, or rather most of us as Catholic converts go through. I will guide us through key points in his life and also his writings, and may the Lord strengthen us to strengthen our faith in him, and help us to see that there's always hope, there's always answers to our questions, especially when we are seeking the truth. St. John Henry Newman was born on 21st of February 1803 in London. His father was a banker, originally came from Cambridgeshire. His mother, Gemina, was a daughter of Henry Foundriner, a papermaker, and his family were originally French Huguenot refugees in England. They married in 1799, and John was the first of their 6 children. His family was relatively well off, and he was sent to Ealing School, a well-known private boarding school in England at that time, where he received a good and thorough classical education. He was a good student and acted in Latin plays, played the violin, won prizes for speeches, and edited periodicals. This happy childhood came to a rather abrupt end with the financial collapse of the Napoleonic Wars, which forced his father's bank to close and many people to lose their jobs at this time. This period, especially from August to the 31st of December 1816, was always regarded as a turning point in his life by St. John Henry Newman. This is because when he was alone at school and shocked by the family disaster, he became sick, but more so since he experienced a religious conversion because of these providential circumstances. Newman had a standard upbringing in the Church of England, where the emphasis was more on the Bible than on dogmas and the sacraments of the Church. His conversion was not an emotional upheaval, such as the case with many conversions in the evangelical setting of his time. He learned Calvinistic doctrine from one of his schoolmasters, Walter Mayers, and the books he lent him. But it was not so much Christianity, such as the Trinity. It was not so much Calvinism, but rather that was important to him, but rather the dogmas of Christianity, such as the Trinity, which became very real for him in ways that it was not before at this point in time. He started to throw himself more and more into theological works, and on a personal level, he felt that God was calling him to some kind of sacrificial service, such as missionary work that would involve at this time the celibate life. At the age of 16, in 1817, he entered Trinity College in Oxford. He was a brilliant but somewhat solitary student. Though shy and introspective, he developed a deep love for learning and read widely, especially in classical literature and philosophy. He adopted a distinctly evangelical form of Anglicanism, believing in the reality of a personal relationship with God and the authority of the scriptures. In 1822, Newman was elected to a fellowship at Oriel College, Oxford, which was then the intellectual heart of the city. Oriel's high academic standards refined his reasoning skills and exposed him to the area's theological debates. He was influenced by colleagues such as Richard Whately, who taught him to think more critically and systematically. Newman was ordained an Anglican priest in 1825 and soon became curate of St. Clement's, Oxford, which was the then vicar of St. Mary's, the University Church. As a vicar, he became known for his eloquent and thoughtful sermons, which attracted large congregations of students. Newman had a love for teaching and helping students, which we will see flows into his love for the university. During these years, Newman moved gradually away from his early evangelicalism, developing a stronger sense of the church's traditions, sacraments, and apostolic authority. But before getting to his conversion, it is important to point out a few important principles Newman started to accept. The first is that the early church's concept of economy. When the early church fathers spoke of the economy or oikonia of God, they were referring to his loving, ordered plan of salvation, and by extension, the church's role in wisely applying that same divine mercy in her governance. This was different from the evangelical preaching of his day, where the preaching of atonement was used to arouse feelings in people that would lead to their conversions. This missing part in that sort of preaching, in the face of the transcendent mystery of God's work in the world, was to become a hallmark of the Oxford movement that he would soon start. It is also in 1832 when he visited parts of the Mediterranean where he sought to find out as much as possible about the Orthodox Church. He was a bit unsettled to see how close they were to the Catholic Church when it came to the veneration of Mary and the other saints during liturgical celebrations. Even more unsettling to Newman's soul was when he visited Rome in March 1883. This is where he, in the eternal city of the apostles, martyrs, and saints, from where the gospel originally came to his home country of England. This city, where there seemed to be so much to admire in the devotions and the piety of the people, was still the city of a corrupt and superstitious religion that he still believed at this time. It is in this time also that the Oxford movement or Tractarianism began, sparked by a sermon by John Kepler protesting state interference in church matters. Newman quickly became the Oxford movement's intellectual leader. The movement sought to renew the Church of England by emphasizing its Catholic heritage, continuity with the early church, and also the church's independence from the state. Various tracts were written by the saint, and one could clearly hear the influence of the Greek fathers in his preaching, especially because of the emphasis on the incarnation, the resurrection, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, the sacraments, and the sense of mystery of the Christian revelation. But the most profound element of these teachings was the emphasis on holiness. As one listener, J.C. Sharp, recalled about Newman, and I quote, "He laid his finger, how gently, yet how powerfully, on some inner place in the hearer's heart, and told him things about himself he had never known until then." Close quote. Through these tracts and sermons, Newman advocated for the position that called Anglo-Catholicism, which acted, according to Newman, as a via media, or a middle way, between Protestantism, which in essence rejected the church referred to in the creeds, and Catholicism, which for Newman at the time substituted the strict authority of the church with the witness of antiquity. So his solution was Anglo-Catholicism. It is important to note here that at this time, and also throughout Newman's career, he was also combating liberalism, theological liberalism, and overt rationalism that was still remaining after the 18th century years of a lot of skeptical philosophy, and also the start of a lot of the historical criticism in the Bible with regards to the Bible. So it was only 3 or 4 months later, in 1839, that the first real doubts about the Anglican Church or position started to bother Newman. He returned to his study of the early church and was reading about a crucial moment in the 5th century at the Fourth Ecumenical Council Pope Leo I upheld the Orthodox faith, while the heretics who believed and taught that Christ had only one divine nature divided into an extreme and more moderate party. So there were two, just to clarify, there were two parties that were essentially fighting against each other. But then Pope Leo upheld the Orthodox faith almost um, from a perspective of defending the church's orthodoxy with regards to all of these types of heresies at the Council of Chalcedon. And what spoke to Newman was the similarity to the current situation that he found himself in, with Rome on the one side and Protestantism on the other, and Anglicanism in the middle. So there was another important principle that came clear to Newman that made the via media concept become something of the past for him. We're reflecting on a Donatist episode in the early African church with a reminder of his own Anglican position. So it was a quote from St. Augustine, Securus judicate orbis terrarium, the verdict of the whole world is conclusive. This means, to quote Newman, that the deliberate judgment in which the whole church at length rests and acquiesces, in other words, agrees on, is an infallible prescription and final sentence against such portions of it as protest and secede. So the idea here is that the via media church falls flat through this principle. So very similar to what the church calls the sensus fidei or sense of the faith, one can understand the whole of, and through this concept of the sensus fidei, one can understand the whole of the church's history. So for Newman at this point, he was seeing that being in the middle of two extremes was not really the way to go forward in interpreting the church's history and seeing the different heresies that sprang up during the church's history, that being in the middle, trying to stay in the middle and not on the side of, say, orthodoxy or heresy, was not the way to understand all of the issues in church history and the role of the church in the history of the world and in the economy of salvation. This then leads to a very important time. Newman published the influential tracts for the times, especially tract 90 in 1841, in which he argued that the 39 Articles, which is the confessional standard for Anglicans, still to this day, could be interpreted in a Catholic sense. So the 39 Articles were different paragraphs regarding Anglican doctrine. And Newman was saying that these articles can be interpreted in a way that can be interpreted in a Catholic sense. So this caused intense controversy, and Newman gradually withdrew from public leadership. So troubled by the growing gap between the Anglican and the early church doctrines, Newman retired to Littlemore, a small village near Oxford, where he lived a semi-monastic life of prayer and study with few companions. Another episode from church history, namely the Arian controversy in the 4th century, spoke profoundly to him. The church was split between three camps again: the extreme Arians, semi-Arians, and Rome. The truth of orthodoxy lay not with the via media, but with Rome. There were two other issues that also pressed on him at this time. One was that the Prussian and the English governments agreed to set up an Episcopalian seat in Jerusalem that would alternate between Anglican, Lutheran, and a Calvinist representative. Politically, it would give Protestantism a foothold in the Holy Land, but this was unacceptable to the Orthodox movement and St. John Henry Newman. And thirdly, there were condemnations that came from the bishops of the Anglican Church regarding Tract 90 and the fact that for Newman these 39 articles could be interpreted in a Catholic sense. His reading of the Church Fathers convinced him that the Catholic Church alone preserved the fullness of the apostolic faith throughout these various episodes of church history and logical arguments. On the 25th of September 1843, he preached his last sermon as an Anglican. His conviction that the Church of England was in schism was now greater than his belief that certain Catholic dogmas, such as the Marian dogmas, were not true developments of original revelation, a thing he struggled with. At the end of 1844, he decided to write a book on the question of doctrinal development and to seek full communion with the Catholic Church if that book did not alter his opinions. Before even completing the work, the saint decided to become part of the Catholic Church. On 3rd October, on the 3rd of October 1845, Newman resigned his fellowship at Oriel College, Oxford, and on the 9th of October, he was received into the Catholic Church by Blessed Dominic Barberi, the Italian Passionist missionary in England. At the end of this most wonderful month for Newman, he went to Oscott College near Birmingham to be confirmed by Nicholas Wiseman, the then president of the college. Wiseman offered Newman and the other converts from the Littlemore community the use of the old Oscott College, later renamed to Maryvale by Newman. In September of the next year, he left for Rome for his studies at Collegio de Propaganda Fide and was ordained a Catholic priest in 1847. While there, he joined the congregation of the Oratory of St. Philip Neri, a community of secular priests dedicated to prayer, preaching, and education. Newman returned to England in 1848 and established the Birmingham Oratory, and later another one in London. This oratory in Birmingham became his lifelong spiritual home and the center of all his ministerial activities. He also worked to educate English Catholics, writing on theology, devotion, and education. He founded the Oratory School in Birmingham in 1859 to provide a solid Catholic education for boys. In 1851, Pope Pius IX asked him to help establish a Catholic university in Ireland, today's University College Dublin. Newman served as its first rector between 1854 and 1858. Newman's reflections on education during his time led to his famous work, The Idea of a University, which is one of the greatest works and most important works on the philosophy of education ever written, emphasizing the harmony of faith and reason and the formation of the whole person. Something interesting and important to point out here as well is the emphasis Newman placed on the laity. Newman pointed to the fact that the laity was consulted before Pope Pius IX infallibly defined the Immaculate Conception of Mary in 1854. This idea of the sense of the faithful was pointed out earlier. The laity's faith was important because the consensus fidelium, which is another term meaning the same as the sense of the faithful or sensus fidei, witnessed to the tradition of the church. As with the Arian crisis in the early 4th century, where the laity was more faithful than some of the bishops in witnessing to the doctrine of the divinity of Christ. And this is a very important principle later elaborated and expanded upon at the Second Vatican Council between 1962 and 1965. Newman faced challenges from both Protestant England and some suspicious Catholics who doubted his loyalty and who felt that Newman's great work on the development of doctrine went too far. In 1864, he published one of his most famous works, Apologia pro vita sua, a moving autobiographical defense of his religious journey and conversion to the Catholic Church. The book transformed public opinion, showing the honesty, the depth, and coherence of his faith. He also wrote the deeply spiritual novel Loss and Gain, meditations such as The Dream of Gerontius, later set to music by Edward Elgar, and numerous theological essays. During the years 1870 to 1879, Newman reflected deeply on the development of Christian doctrine. He wrote the essay on the development of Christian doctrine back in 1845. At that point, he didn't even finish the work before deciding to just become Catholic and accept that there were no objections anymore in his heart. He refined the work in this time, and what we've already shown is how, or referred to, is how Catholic teachings grow organically over time while remaining faithfully to the apostolic core of those teachings rooted in divine revelation. And this idea has profoundly influenced Catholic theology. His thesis was essentially that since a living idea is necessarily a developing idea, and true development brings out rather than obscures the original idea, doctrinal development is to be expected and indeed welcomed in Christianity. But if this is the case, then an infallible authority, namely the magisterium or teaching authority of the Church under the Pope, is needed to distinguish true from false developments in the unfolding of a revelation that claims to be objectively true. And Catholicism, and this is something very important for Newman to point out, is that Catholicism is the only form of Christianity that shows a continual development that purports to be guaranteed by a legitimate authority. And modern Catholicism seems definitively to be the historical continuation of early Christianity. When Vatican I, which was convened between 1869 and 1870, defined papal infallibility, Newman accepted it obediently, but with careful theological nuance, helping Catholics interpret it faithfully and calmly in England, since they were what were called ultramontanists, or not Montanans, but ultramontans, who had a very, you could say, heretical view of papal authority. And Newman was, through his own calm and patient disposition, helped English Catholics to understand this doctrine that was defined at the First Vatican Council. In recognition of his lifelong fidelity, learning, and pastoral charity, Pope Leo XIII made Newman a cardinal in 1879, without requiring him to be a bishop, which is a very unique honor. And Newman chose as his motto as a cardinal, cor ad cor locutior, heart speaks to heart. This phrase summed up his view of faith as a personal encounter between the soul and God, and sums up the ministerial work of this beloved saint. In his later years, Newman lived quietly at the Birmingham Oratory, writing and guiding many through letters. His last major work was The Grammar of Assent in 1870, which explored how faith involves both reason and deeper movements of the heart and conscience. St. John Henry Newman died on the 11th of August 1890, aged 89, and he was buried in Rednall near Birmingham. St. John Henry Newman was beatified as Blessed John Henry Newman by Pope Benedict XVI on the 19th of September 2010, and was canonized as St. John Henry Newman on the 13th of October 2019 by Pope Francis. Just to note, his two miracle stories that occurred through his intercession in heaven are really profound stories, and I would really invite our listeners to go and read about the two miracle stories that led to the beatification and canonization of St. John Henry Newman. St. John Henry Newman will be declared a doctor of the Church on 1 November 2025 by Pope Leo XIV. And this, as I mentioned in the beginning, is very important for us as Catholic converts, since we see the recognition of the Church, not that he's the first ever convert, but since he is somebody who, as a convert, had profound influence on the Church's teachings, his passion and dedication especially. So Newman is now venerated as St. John Henry Newman, and he's a model for us in terms of intellectual faith, humility, and integrity. His thought continues to shape modern Catholic theology, especially in the areas of doctrinal development, conscience, faith and reason, and education. I want to leave us with an encouragement. This is especially encouragement for converts, but can be applied to all of us as Catholics. Never be afraid to ask questions. This is something that most, if not all, Catholic converts can relate to. Asking questions one has probably never asked in your life at this point in time when you are starting to think about the Catholic Church. It is quite daunting and causes a lot of anxiety. But this is a necessary step for us to get closer to the truth. Just like St. John Henry Newman, we must continue with our daily work and responsibilities, depending on the Holy Spirit to give us peace and guidance. This is also advice that we can give to family and friends who are considering the Catholic faith and who have a lot of questions. We must be their support and love them where they are on their journeys, exercising patience and desiring the best for them. Second point is to make an effort to study. This is something that for most can seem a bit daunting and a big mountain to climb, but the effort, time, and sacrifice it can take to learn more about the faith is worth it. One does not need to be a great intellectual like St. John Henry Newman to do this. The Lord sees your humble efforts and loves you so deeply in those moments of struggle to understand and grow closer to Him. He sees your heart. It is important to connect with other Catholic converts and those on a similar journey as you. And that is where the work of the Catholic Network South Africa also comes in. We are there to answer questions and provide the support you need, and even after your conversion. The third point is to remind yourself that the church is a hospital for sinners. As a Catholic convert, you might be misunderstood and not guided properly by those already in the church. This might be because of ignorance about how to help those who have been enlightened by the truths of the Catholic Church, because it feels like there's a new world that has opened up for you, and one doesn't always see the same passion and fervor in others. Just like St. John Henry Newman, we will face bad reactions from both family, friends, and acquaintances outside of the church, and some of the church's members that might not provide you with the required love, guidance, and support you need in those moments. The fourth point is persevere. It is worth it. St. John Henry Newman's decision to enter into full communion with the Catholic Church was a moment of immense personal cost for him. He lost many Anglican friends, his position at Oxford, and public esteem. But he described it as an entering into the one fold of the Redeemer. To be in the fullness of the Christian faith and the truth is what overcomes and defeats regret about what you are losing, the hurt you are experiencing from people, and being misunderstood. But you gain beautiful people who love Jesus, His church, and her saints, and who will be there to love and support you for the rest of your journey. As Jesus refers to in Matthew 13, verse 44 to 46, where a man discovers a treasure hidden in a field. In his joy, he hides the treasure, sells all that he has, and then buys that field to possess the treasure. The pearl of a great price, a merchant who deals in fine pearls, finds one that is exceptionally valuable. He goes and sells everything he owns to buy that pearl. Finding the treasure of the kingdom and giving everything up for it and the rewards that come with it. And we see this also in Jesus' promise in Mark 10, verse 28 to 31, that there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters, or mother or father, or children or lands, for my sake and the gospel, who will not receive 100-fold now in this time, houses and brothers and sisters, and mothers and children and lands, with persecutions, and in the age to come eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. So continually give yourself over to Jesus and say, even if it's 10 times a day, Jesus, I trust in you. I want to leave us with a beautiful hymn from St. John Henry Newman. And I thank you for listening. And may St. John Henry Newman intercede for us to the Lord for continual growth in humility, love of truth, and mercy for everyone he entrusted to us in our lives. Firmly I believe, and truly, God is free and God is one. And I next acknowledge duly manhood taken by the Son. And I trust and hope most fully in that manhood crucified, and each thought and deed unruly, due to death, as he has died. Simply to his grace and holy light and life and strength belong, and I love supremely, solely, him the holy, him the strong. And I hold in veneration for the love of him alone, Holy Church as his creation, and her teachings as his own. Adoration may be given with and through the angelic host to the God of earth and heaven, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Thank you.